Good morning, afternoon, everyone. So today we talk about urban sociology. I'm finishing chapter 19, where they pack in the environment, urbanization, and population all into one chapter. These are some of my areas of expertise, so I enjoy this part of the course. Let's see. So today I will wrap up talking about urban areas. On Thursday, I'll start talking about Chapter 20, Globalization. I'll also have the study guide uploaded for the exam next week, and I will go over that on Thursday as well. So the exam will cover chapters 1, 2, 3, 19, and 1, 2, 3, 19 and 20. I'll have the study guide uploaded. That will be much more clear than I'm being right now. Other important points. I think that's it for now. Again, I'll have the study guide, and that should alleviate some concerns that anyone may have. Otherwise, good job on the packback posts. The TAs and I love reading them, and they are, insightful, and I like to see that you're thinking about these topics, because many of you will have to probably be major actors in rebuilding the world. Okay, when we talk about urbanization, you can see basically where most people live, and importantly, industrialized societies. And what I think is always kind of fascinating here you have Japan, and there you've got South Korea. This right here is North Korea. Now, if you know the geography here of Korea, you know that it's a peninsula. But since there's so little industrialization in North Korea, it looks, at night, basically, it goes dark, and it looks like South Korea is an island out there in the sea. The United States, pretty lit up, even in the, parts where you wouldn't necessarily see as many people in the Rockies and so on. Europe, very lit up as well. You can see where the jungles are, and anyway, fascinating. So in 2008, we reached an important milestone. More people lived in cities of around 1 million than did not. If you remember, we talked about huge population growth, and it kind of takes off during this time period. And what happens is that basically people are moving away from the farms, out of the rural areas, and into cities. This really began in Great Britain, among other places. But you had this new working class that's, converged on the cities, and you had this masses of people, and it was not a very sanitary place to be. I would argue that one of the most important inventions of the last few hundred years, few millennia, is the flushing toilet. Once you're able to do this, then sanitation becomes almost necessary, and you kind of wonder why someone would not have a flushing toilet. You see that, this is, about 100, 120, 30 years ago. You saw some of the first surveys where they're doing kind of like early social network analysis, kind of looking at where people who got sick were, and they found that they all were near this one water hole, and so people were getting cholera from the water there. And this was one of the first analyses of city data. And it was very important, because then you had the development of the flushing toilet, and this, as I said, makes modern life possible. We have a few cities that are kind of have an outsized influence on the world, more than their countries do in some cases. Saskia Sassen, a sociologist at the University of Chicago, she came up with this concept in the 1990s called the global city, kind of watching New York, London, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, Istanbul, other countries who have been around for a long time, are globally cosmopolitan, where you have a lot of cultural dynamism, you have a lot of entrepreneurialism, risk-taking, kind of a meshing of different cultures, and so on and so forth. And she was arguing that this is something new, that where, these cities, some people feel they don't feel as, connected to their country as perhaps just their city. The one key thing about the global city is that it also refers to the world's financial system. So most global cities are places where you see stock markets and major companies, financial companies. They have their headquarters at places like this. I would also, I think now we could add tech cities. So San Francisco and Seattle, where you have major tech firms located, which are, in the coming years are probably going to, kind of edge out the financial firms in terms of their importance to the world economy, if they have not already. So the global city itself will probably shift as capitalism shifts. We're seeing, masses of people. We see the megalopolis. One way to think about this is this idea of conurbation. Sorry, I've got a air conditioner that's getting loud. Okay, so a conurbation is an agglomeration of towns or cities into one unbroken area. So, you can drive from Washington, D.C. up to Maine, or up to Boston, I should say, and basically feel like you're in an urban area the whole time. When the first time I drove from basically Los Angeles down to San Diego, one of the things that kind of shocked me was for a while there on the 101, it was just open. I mean, most of Southern California is very developed right up to the coastline. And then there's this whole area at night that was just dark. And I was just wondering, how did they preserve this? Well, it turns out that was Camp Pendleton military base. So, that's why it hasn't been built up. But so you have this conurbation I've done a lot of research out west. So Los Angeles is a good example. The city of Los Angeles is, over by the coast. It's comparatively small to the larger conurbation. If you think of urban areas as unbroken, then the Los Angeles goes about 150 miles to the east to get out to San Bernardino and Pomona and other places out east, which to us would be way west. Nevertheless, so we see one of the things that's kind of fascinating then is, where do people work? I've been kind of curious what the data is showing regarding commutes, how commutes have changed as a result of coronavirus, that sort of thing. So, kind of watch where this is going. Like I said, this was sort of an area of expertise of mine. I've been interested in urban planning for a long time, and I grew up in a rural area, but close to Omaha, Nebraska, which is not that urban, but just urban enough that I got an understanding of the urban feel, and so I've been interested in how we develop our use of space. So I've done research on zoning, on parking ordinances, all these different things, and all of which are more important than you may realize. Many of you who live here on the East Coast may or may not know who Robert Moses is. You probably have been part of his system for a long time. So he kind of planned much of the New York City freeway system. His ideas were hugely influential. He kind of built up New York City and tore down a lot of New York City in order to do that. And, for a while this was fine. People are getting better housing and so on and so forth. You're getting roads bringing people into where the jobs are. Robert Moses kind of went on like a power trip and just didn't stop and wanted to basically eliminate everything, was going to turn a huge part of Central Park into a parking lot. He also didn't show much compassion for those residents who had been dislocated from his plans. And you see the emergence of this woman named Jane Jacobs. And at the time, she was just kind of living, I believe in the Chelsea area or the Greenwich Village, I'm sorry. And she was saying that, what cities need high density, they need mixed use buildings, so commercial on the bottom floor, residential above. So you have this diversity of uses. There's more pedestrian orientation and interaction. This is all very pre-COVID-19. But this was what I was looking at, these high density buildings where they're mixed use to try to save space. They try to, they try to converge into one building, multiple different uses. So Jane Jacobs is well liked by libertarians because her emphasis on personal freedom. She didn't like planners kind of shoving their ideas onto citizens without citizen involvement. She wrote this wonderful book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she basically brought down Robert Moses. She became a political activist, organizer, and, was very opposed to what was going on. And she was supported by more people in New York City than he was. So we have Central Park today. Thank you, Jane. But we can, drive around New York more easily than we could have before. So thanks, Rob. If you're interested in this, and we'll kind of return to this when we talk about race, but the color of law, a forgotten history of how our government segregated America. So in urban areas, especially in central cities, you had African Americans move into these areas from especially the South in the early 20th century. And in the mid-20th century, white people began moving to the suburbs. And some of this was just basic prejudice and discrimination. Some of it was being lured by low property values. Workers could afford big homes for the first time, cars, that sort of thing, these new suburban strip malls. All of that was very interesting and appealing to people. And so people began moving to the suburbs. Why didn't black people follow? A couple reasons. The most important, they were not given loans that white people were. The American federal government gave a lot of white people better loans and help with moving into suburban areas. So the American government did not do that for black people. So basically, black people were left in central cities for like 50 or 60 years. Now we're seeing changes. But then you had a lot of different zoning laws and a whole bunch of different ways in which the government segregated places. Early in the 1940s, it became pretty clear that some of these buildings were just not very sanitary and safe. So you get this urban renewal process. This is basically fixing up some of these old buildings, making them look nicer, repainting some of them. Sometimes if they're not, if they're just not good enough, you're just going to have to destroy them, demolish them, and basically start over. This is before the Olympics in Spain a few years ago. This is after. You see they did a lot of development. You have this kind of railway yard, this disused space here that becomes, looks like a big park, and you've got, roundabouts and places to park and housing and so on and so forth. Now, after, this is, where people always take note, this is where people always miss a question on the exam. Be sure to tell the difference between urban renewal and gentrification. So urban renewal is just fixing up the building or, making a new one. Gentrification, though, is after this process happens and you have more affluent, wealthier people moving in to those places, oftentimes from suburbs. Now, the sort of etymology of gentrification is the gentry, coming from the idea of the English country gentry moving into London, essentially, and you call that gentrification. So in this case, it's like people coming from the suburbs, moving into the cities because that's where the restaurants are, the clubs, all the things you can't do right now that would lure people to the cities. All of a sudden, having a backyard sounds pretty nice. So gentrification, we're seeing this process basically everywhere in the world. It's causing home values and property values to skyrocket in some places. If from Philadelphia or New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and so on, these places are extraordinarily expensive right now. Gentrification is controversial in sociology. So it's a huge source of debate within urban sociology if it helps cities, residents, or not. The reality is it's hard to say. You can't just say it does or it doesn't because it kind of varies by time and place. So, it's more of a combination. So sometimes it helps people, it helps neighborhoods break up concentrated poverty. So we have now decades of research that show if, you're in a district that has a lot of poverty for decades, it's just, you don't have role models there, you don't have institutions that are going to inspire people. And so that's one of the things that you need within communities to get people out of poverty. So gentrification can do that. Interestingly, there's a process that's been happening since the 1960s where mostly white artists would move into industrial areas where the apartment prices are cheaper, a bit more. There's more criminality in these neighborhoods, because of poverty generally. And so artists move into these neighborhoods and they'll start, and maybe some of their friends will move in there. Pretty soon they'll start someone will open a gallery there. Once a gallery opens, that's when the developers are like, aha, all right, let's see if we can get a restaurant or two in here, that sort of thing, because then this neighborhood is sort of taking off. So I've watched neighborhoods go from being dead industrial zones to hip urban places to being sort of, dead urban places again. So this is an interesting process, and we'll just kind of have to see where this goes. Maybe something you could. I'm always interested in thinking of where you plan on living and locating. So do you think gentrification is ever justified? Yes, conditionally. Yes, no, uncertain. Something you can think about. When we talk about cities, Chicago has an important history in this study. In the study of urban areas. The plan of Chicago in 1909, this was the first ideal city plan. It integrated public transit systems and highways. So this is an early design for Chicago that was never actually implemented. But you see here, it's kind of like a wheel system where you've got the center and you've got these spokes, which are different roads that would take people in. Already, though, within a few years, the automobile had made this all completely irrelevant. So that's something to keep in mind, is that, the automobile, it just took like 15 years for it to become a very dominant and necessary technology. And so, no one saw that in 1900 when these rickety machines were first brought up, and, they would break down a lot and weren't very safe and so on and so forth. So we see that, most cities now have planned for the automobile. So it's a very big change. So I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but one of the biggest immigration studies in the U.S. looked at Polish peasants coming from Poland and moving to Chicago. Chicago has more people of Polish descent than anywhere in the world outside of Warsaw, Poland, kind of like Iran and Los Angeles. Los Angeles has more Iranians than anywhere in the world outside of Tehran, which is why it's sometimes called Tehrangeles, those parts of Tehran. This is Santa Maria, California, one of the cities I was doing research on. Kind of a suburban city, but not on the edge of any other city. So it's the suburban model, but on it by itself. So you can kind of see that. When we look at cities and suburbs, we see that a lot of the growth of the last 20 years has happened out west and in the south, and most of it happening in the suburbs. So that's, a huge change. And as people are working more remotely, what we're probably going to see is a drop in commutes, which would be great for the environment and for health and all these other things. Problems, on the horizon. Well, they're here already and they're going to grow. A lot of poverty in suburbs that people aren't always aware of. And especially now, I think this is going to take off, and it's going to become very important how we sort of redesign our economy, given what we now know about the coronavirus pathogen, human contact, connectedness, all of these different things, technology. We have the potential to lift a lot of people out of poverty and the potential to push a lot of people into it. So, we're going to have to make some tough choices in the weeks ahead. Again, looking at people who are poor living in the suburbs. So this is a big change from the past. So suburban city governments are not really used to thinking about having to address poverty. And so this is a big change for these cities, and they'll probably have to continue, and we'll see where this all goes. So you can think of where you grew up and where you would like to be. Like I said, just promote my book again, which, by the way, is ridiculously priced. If I would have known it would have been priced that much, I know what I would have done. Anyway, so I became interested in this smart growth and this attempt to develop urban areas more sustainably. And I interviewed a lot of developers, engineers, architects, planners, and urban activists and so on, and turned it into this book, Smart Growth Entrepreneurs, looking at the commercial spaces on the bottom floor and residential spaces above, which is all great, except they were already struggling on the down floor with companies like Amazon taking business. And now, as people aren't going into small shops, it's going to devastate our economy and how it's been developed. So it'll be very hard to know where this is all going. We know that this economy that we developed in the second half of the 20th century, and that we did a good job of video recording and driving into our minds, that this economy is probably not going to last. It's addicted to oil. Oil prices are low now, but actually we're not consuming like we did here. So what happens then? Well, it's hard to say. Oil companies go bust, so you get big changes in terms of geopolitics and power. We'll see what happens. But we are living in a time of tremendous environmental damage, as we've talked about for the last couple of weeks. And, you can just read the news and read horrifying stories about our environment and where we are right now, potentially where we're going. Ingenuity is one of those fantastic things that humans have, though. So I'm always inspired by these architects and designers who are able to design these houses for humans and cats to live in without conflict. And if we can do that, if they can do that, I think we can figure out a way to live with the rest of life on Earth in a way that's sustainable for us all. All right, on Thursday, I will talk about Chapter 20 and the exam. All right, everyone, that concludes Chapter 19. Have a good week.